so first of all, I feel like the luckiest girl in the world right now.
Wow.
Because this is my first time at Ake Arts and Book Festival, and this is my first time I get to do a book chat with one of my favorite authors, Tendai Huchu. I remember when we first met via email, you said that the last time you came to Nigeria, you didn't get to move around much. So now that you're here for the next 3 days, what do you actually hope to get out of the Nigerian experience as regards food, music, art, and culture?
Well, thank you for that warm introduction. It's good to be back after 6 years. And thank you for having me back, Lola. It was also cool to see. I know how difficult these things are to organize. So it was cool to see before you started this that there was a therapy thing that you were doing with other festival directors. So, yeah. But being here, I mean, the thing that I remember the most the last time I came around was the food. And the food's still on point. Some can see I didn't even have this belly before I came. Yeah. Apart from that, the company's been all right as well. I'm one of those people that thinks there's too many Kenyans about, but it's fine. Apart from that, but yeah, I'm just going to be visiting a few spots. Yesterday I went to a few places in Lagos, and that was good as well. So I haven't been caged up in the hotel.
I think that's nice. Okay, so I didn't buy this book specifically for Ake, just so you know. I actually wore it to kind of represent the character Ropa in one of Tendai Huchu's books in the Edinburgh Nights Series, Library of the Dead and Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments. She has green hair, so I... Thank you, E for effort.
When the Nollywood version comes out.
I have to be inside. I have to be inside. Okay, so your body of work, which is what we're here to talk about today, all the books you've literally written, is quite interesting. So I remember in 2010, Hairdresser of Harare came out, and it was about basically two hairdressers, Vimbai and Dumisani. Then we had the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician. Quite a title, so I would like to say MMM, which revolves around 3 Zimbabwean men who fled the Mugabe regime to Edinburgh. Now we have the Edinburgh Nights Series, which is set in near future dystopia Scotland. So you literally have literary fiction, and now you have speculative fiction. So do you find it challenging to switch from one genre to another? And how does this shift actually help you express yourself in writing?
Okay, so I've never quite viewed it as a shift myself. The way I've always sort of like worked is when I embark on a story or a novel, one of the first questions I ask myself is, what's the best form for this thing to take? So you're not constantly reinventing the wheel. There are these pre-existing narratological conventions that you can use as a vehicle to push the story forward, so the reader comes in knowing what to expect. So if we start with, you know, a brooding man with a bottle of whiskey in an office and a glass, set there, and some beautiful woman walks into the room, we almost know 9 times out of 10 that this is going to be a noir novel, something someone like Leia Denle would write. So when I did the Hairdresser of Harare, I was playing with the genre conventions of chick lit, which was hot at the time. I think people took it a little more seriously because I'm a man, right? So, but I was writing about women in a salon and doing hair and that kind of thing. But then it was like, oh yeah, this guy, okay, so he can't be romance because he's got dreadlocks. He must be a serious guy. That's what I had at the time. So we'll say he's a literary writer. When I did the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician, it was my take on the genre spy novel. So it's a spy novel that tries to disguise itself as a literary novel. So these forms are things that I like to play with. Once I have the form of the work, I can then start creating. Before I nail that down, there's something that I'm working on at the moment that, even though I'm like 50,000 words in, it doesn't feel right, and I think it's because I'm trying to force it into a shape that it's not meant to be. So I'll probably have to go back to the drawing board and find out, like, okay, what's the best genre convention I can use to convey this particular story. So that's kind of the reason why I do it, but I can understand when people say, okay, you've changed, you've moved into this other thing, and that's also part of the iceberg theory, the fact that people only see what's at the tip of the iceberg. They don't see the experimentation and all the stuff that's churning underneath, especially the bits that don't work, that never even make it to print, and there's a lot of that stuff. We just don't like to admit it because, you know, you want to be that fabulous writer who kind of nails it all the time. So initially when I was thinking of my writing practice, I thought, okay, so literary fiction will get me working a little bit heavier with character work. I took SFF as a place where I could explore world building and scene setting and that kind of thing. And I took crime as an area where I could work on my plotting skills. So that was for my own practice. But over time, all that stuff blends. So whatever you get, regardless, I've now got a bag of tricks that I can rely on when I craft the next work. Does that make any sense?
It makes sense. So when you're crafting the next work, do you actually think about how your readers would react?
How the readers would react?
Yeah, because they're used to, oh, I've read Hairdresser of Harare, I'm sure it's going to bring out something similar, and then you just bring out Library of the Dead where they're removing intestines and all that. So like, how did you think people were going to react to this, to Edinburgh Nights Series?
Well, for me, I think readers are pretty gregarious. I mean, most of the people that I know who enjoy novels, they don't just stick to one particular genre or one particular thing. They hope about a lot. But the publishing industry works differently because it's, you know, from this side, we like to say we're pure artists, right? I just do art. I don't care about any of that. But there's someone who's putting their money into creating a product that they sell to the market. So if I bought a John Grisham novel, I would be sorely disappointed if it turned out to be a space opera. I want a fine legal thriller. I know what I'm getting. So I remember after I'd done The Hairdresser of Harare, and I did the second novel, I was taken to lunch with my publisher at Freight Books. And yeah, I was still in that starving artist phase, so it was good to get a free meal. And so I'm sat there wolfing this stuff down, and my editor goes, you know, I'm preparing to hear this praise, you know, about my, you know, unfathomable genius and how great this thing that I've submitted to them is. And my publisher goes, you know, Tendai, readers will only give you a certain range. We were doing really well with this hairdresser thing, but we think this is too much of a diversion. So I'm almost choking on this beef stroganoff. But I'm still gonna eat it because it was a high-priced restaurant that I was in. Yeah, and at the time, they didn't go with me. I actually got dumped because they felt like, yeah, whatever I was doing wasn't going to work. But it was also at that point that I realized, like, look, I have to double down on this thing where I start showcasing stuff that's distinctly different so that I'm not kind of pigeonholed into trying to do this one thing over and over again, because that can be a pain. And I know several of my peers that have kind of struggled with those kind of issues when they've tried to move. But thinking about the African lit scene on its own, sort of like in isolation, I find that there's a lot of writers that do that genre crossing thing. Bryony Rim, This September Sun, a fine kind of genre-bending literary novel. Her second novel was a crime novel, and that seemed to be fine. Leia Denle, who's here, kind of wrote a fantastic sci-fi novel, which I thought he was trying to muscle into our space. But there is this Tony Khan as well, literary fiction, did Crime with Carnivorous City. So there's all these things that are going on if we allow them to happen. But I can't come from sort of like the naive artist point and say, I don't get where the publishers are coming from when they say this doesn't particularly work for us. And that's why you find my lit work is published as Tendai Huchu, and I do this other stuff as Tiao Huchu, so you don't get Marmite when you want Nutella.
I'll note that down. So in the Hairdresser of Harare, you talk about gender roles, and a particular quote comes to mind. So it goes, a male hairdresser, who'd ever heard of such a thing? Why did you decide to craft a character that follows the popular stereotype of gay men being feminine?
This one wants to get me canceled. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Again, one of the things that I do in my own work, and we're all told, anyone who's been to a creative writing workshop is told, avoid cliches, yeah. Right? I come at it from the opposite end of the spectrum, where I actually actively embrace cliches and try to rework them. I think some of these conventions are shorthands that work for a certain reason. So the reason I had Doobie as a hairdresser and he was gay is I knew the reader would expect that. But then you have Wimbai, on the other hand, who completely doesn't see this. But it also functioned on the basis that this is a Western trope that we've now adopted. So Wimbai, who's Zimbabwean, wouldn't necessarily think in that sense. But I wanted the reader to know right from the start that this is who this guy was. And I'm a fan of Columbo. Has anyone watched that? Are there any Columbo fans? Yeah. I mean, Columbo pretty much overturns the detective genre, right? Your usual mystery flick starts with, say there's a murder and we see a body and the detective comes in and they kind of have to interview the suspects and figure out who's done it. In Columbo, you see who does it. The murderer appears, you know exactly who they are. And then the detective comes in and he starts doing the work. So you are ahead of Columbo, but you see his interactions with the actual murderer, and that's where you get the satisfaction from. So that's a flick that I really like. So I like to play certain things with an open hand, and you certainly hope it works for certain readers that get exactly what it is you're doing. But now in the library of sort of The Dead and Our Lady and this series that I'm working on, you'll find that even the sentences that I use, Ropa, the main character, uses an awful lot of cliches. Like, if I can find a cliche, I will throw it in there. And that's just kind of my reaction to this other thing that says you're not supposed to do that.
That's great. I don't know why, maybe it was only me that thought it was going to be a romance novel and they were going to fall in love, which obviously did not happen, so that's fine. Okay, so still on the Hairdresser of Harare, Dumisani and Wimbai are rivals in Mrs. Khumalo's salon. For Wimbai, she actually believes that whiteness is a state of mind, and for her, her client should leave the salon feeling like white women. But Dumisani, on the other hand, makes women feel more like themselves. So is this rivalry reflective of the struggles that Africans have in pandering towards Eurocentric beauty standards?
Yeah. In short, I think you pretty much got what's going on there. There is, and we can't escape these Eurocentric beauty standards because they're blasted at you 24/7 virtually, that tell you you have to look a certain way, even if it doesn't fit. And then occasionally they might, particularly if you live in the West, take one black person and say, okay, so we've got this one that's also beautiful. You know, it's Idris Elba and no one else. But I wanted these two hairdressers to, I was playing with really simple binaries that you can read on the surface. Rimbai, female, straight, Christian, conservative. Yeah, that's the contradiction, and that's the bit in which she's imperfect, because you always have to have, sorry, you might not have heard that, but TK mentioned that Bimbai was a single mother. But I was thinking, as you craft a character, there always has to be some kind of quote-unquote flaw. Now, this is not me saying, go and tweet and say, Tendai Huchu said single mothers are flawed. But in Wimbai's worldview, with how she perceives herself and her upbringing, this is a flaw. So there's always that difference between the author's perspective and the character's perspective. And whenever there's a clash like that, you always go with how the character sees the world. I find in being edited, and I'm, again, one of those writers that really enjoys being edited and working with an editor in fine-tuning the work afterwards. And usually where you find the most problems, it's because you've kind of tried to insert your own worldview, something that doesn't fit your character. But I forget what we're talking about.
We're talking about the rivalry between Dumisani and Bimbai, and if it's reflective of the struggles that Africans have in pandering towards Eurocentric beauty standards. You know, the long hair, the wigs, they look like Beyonce, or no, not Beyonce, Beyonce is black, sorry, but look like Mariah Carey, you know, and all that.
Oh yeah, and that's why the title is The Hairdresser of Harare. So you as the reader get to pick which one of the two you root for, if anyone at all.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to your new series, the Edinburgh Nights Series. So in this series, you write about magic from a scientific viewpoint. You reference scientists like Thompson that says that magic is the result of centuries of progressive scientific refinement. So why have you decided to take the spirituality out of magic? Because for me, when I read most of these books, I see a lot of, oh, it came from one ancestor, our gods, this, our gods. I go to a temple to worship. I have to keep doing that to get the powers and all. But yours, you took the spirituality out of it. I didn't really see much of that there. So, and I want to know why you decided to relate it to science.
Okay, so the magic as a science thing has been going on for a very long time. I'm certainly not the one who invented it, and there's a famous author's son who might, you know, accuse me of pinching stuff from his dad if I'm not careful. But what you do when you have that, okay, so when you do a magic system, one of the questions that you've got to ask yourself is what is possible and what's impossible, because with softer magic systems, one of the difficulties that you encounter is there will always be moments in which the reader says, well, they did that, but how come they can't magic their way out of this particular situation? And that becomes a problem. So you almost need to create a kind of straitjacket for yourself, or at least a set of rules which the reader knows, and then through working in that framework, there's a certain kind of logical consistency to what's going on. Scientific magic in itself, which is what the magic and the Library of the Dead is called, is an oxymoron, right? You've got science and magic, and the two are at polar opposites, because as soon as it becomes something that's explicable by as scientific logic, something empirical, it stops being a mystery. It's no longer magical. And you see that kind of in the growth of different professions. If you think about how healing gradually morphed into medicine, right? So you no longer have that mysticism, at least if you go to like a mainstream kind of hospital, then you no longer have that mysticism attached to it. And so if magic was a thing in the real world, there would end up being that same kind of rationalization, because it would turn into a profession. So it would be something fairly mundane, at least in my view. The way I sort of look at it, it's think about literature now and some of the papers that come out where they say, oh, we put someone in an MRI scan and we proved that reading a novel can light up the empathetic parts of the brain. Therefore, novels are good because we have the scientific basis for it, right? Because as with anything, if you have, we live in this world where there is a constant competition for funding, particularly in academic spaces, where the hard sciences are at the top, your STEM stuff, and the humanities are at the bottom. So there's now that need to kind of rationalize the stuff to say, oh, but we have the science to tell you it creates a better society because we've put people in MRI scanners that have shown this, which I think is a lot of bollocks because I'm in this for the fun as well. It's enough for me that this thing that we do is enjoyable and meaningful, and that for me, minus all these other rationalizations that we add into it, I think that for me is enough. And I also come at it from the perspective that if this thing, which is a trivial thing, I mean, if I fuck up in my novel, no one's going to die. If a farmer messes up, people are going to starve, right? So there's like real world consequences. But for me, that triviality of what it is I do actually makes it more meaningful because therefore it's something that I choose to do as opposed to something that has to be done for some kind of good that you can explain away easily. Yeah.
So in this series, you actually play with the concept of astral travel. And you create a world known as the Ever There, where ghosts that have unfinished business stay before they move on to the afterlife. Now, it is commonly believed, it's not me that said it, it is commonly believed that an aspect of a writer's belief always slips into his work. So are you someone that believes in astral travel? And do you think there's a place like the Ever There?
I suppose aspects of you sip into the work. I was sort of raised in a conservative Catholic setup where, the belief in an afterlife, that's all part of the package. My own journey through life has led me towards a very kind of, not a militant atheism of the Dawkins sort, but the belief that this reality is the only one that's there. And for me, it actually means this reality is much, much more special because we're here for, that's all we get. And you don't get to do it over, you don't get to come back again and again. There isn't like some other plane that you are sent to. Therefore, what you do here is actually meaningful because this is it, right? But for this book, what am I doing when I introduce the concept of ghosts? For me, ghosts are like really interesting. Again, because of that Catholic background, I'm a wimp. I can't do horror films. Like if you got me to watch something like The Exorcist or something with, I can't do spooky horror. If you give me like vampires or zombies, stuff that I can see, I'm okay with that.
That is very strange because have you read your book? It is spooky.
Yeah, but we human, we have these contradictions. So the stuff that's supernatural, if I watch that and go to bed and something creaks, I'm jumping out of bed and turning the light on. Right? That's what I do. But what are we talking about when we talk about ghosts? I think they represent something. You can use them, certainly, for those spooky jump scares, just to have something that freaks the reader out. But they also speak to unresolved issues. So whenever there is a ghost story and a ghost comes along, it wants something from the living. It's like, okay, I've been murdered and now you've got to find my murderer, or there was some offense that was done to it. It needs something done so it can rest. And I think one series that kind of played around with this in a way that you can see so well and viscerally is Netflix's The Haunting of Hill House. I don't know if anyone's watched it, but the ghosts in that particular series, they all, at least they've been explained as metaphors for the 5 stages of grief or something like that. And in the series that I'm crafting, there's a lot of history to do with the Scottish Enlightenment and all that stuff. You know, some of which you might have heard about during the first panel that was on this morning. And what I wanted to do was to bring some of these ideas from this period that really shaped the world that we live in such a violent but profound way. So for anyone who might not have an idea, the Scottish Enlightenment is this weird period. So if you were in for the first talk that happened today, you heard about this union between, you know, empire creating Britain or the UK, right? So Scotland joins in the Union in 1707 because they tried to do a colonial thing in Panama that went disastrously wrong. This is in the second novel, Our Lady of Mysterious Ailments. They had a mission over to Panama, they raised a lot of money for it, and it pretty much bankrupted the nation. And they were stuck. And the only way out for the aristocrats who pumped in most of the money, was to get into a union with England, and England would pick up some of the debts that Scotland had notched up. So in return, they lost their parliament and they kind of got absorbed into this English thing, and then they got all these perks of running sort of colonies in the Caribbean and stuff like that. And they made a lot of money. So when you come to Edinburgh, which is the city where I live in, it's this quaint touristy place that's, you know, it's these old, beautiful buildings. But when you know the history of how some of this stuff was built, the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is where my Society of Magicians are actually housed. They have some kind of link with the Royal Bank of Scotland. The Royal Bank of Scotland only emerges in I think in 1723, because it was one of the mechanisms for the Scots to get compensation for this colonial project that they had failed from the English. And up till today, that bank is still there, even though it's been kind of folded into NatWest and stuff, but it actually grew for 300 years. I think along the way, it absorbed another 300 or so odd banks, so it's this hybrid chimera. The city, the new town of the city, which is kind of as this neoclassical architectures and these grand buildings, was built with funding from this bank. Some of the houses, there's an interesting lady from Grenada called Lisa Williams who does Black History walks in Edinburgh. And if you walk with her, she'll tell you, okay, this building was because during the abolition of slavery, the slave owner or the plantation owner got compensation for loss of his human property, and he used it to build this wonderful building that you have here. You know, all that sugar stuff that you listened to earlier on, that is right there in the architecture of the city. But what I want to do as a fantasy writer is to tell some of this history by actually bringing through certain historical figures that were part of the Enlightenment. So you had all these ideas about race, which were refined during the Enlightenment. And those are things that will come up as the series begins to progress. But beyond that, there's other ghosts that I use that come in for very trivial stuff, like one just wants to pass on a baking recipe to her grandson before she passes. So you have that mix between the grand historical and kind of like the mundane stuff, which is how we live. Yeah.
So I want to move on to my favorite character, obviously Ropa, because I would not be like this if I didn't like Ropa. So Ropa, who is actually just 14, drops out of school to become a ghost talker. And she goes in and out of internship so she can fund her sister's school fees and take care of her grandmother who is ill. So I just want to ask you a question first before I ask my main question. Are you the firstborn?
Nah, I'm in the middle.
You say it like that, nah, like you don't want to be.
Who wants that level of responsibility?
Okay.
You have to pick your birthing order wisely, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think the expectations that are actually placed on firstborn, especially when they are children, or unrealistic?
I suppose we could start by even asking, what is childhood? Because our conception of childhood right now is historically a fairly recent thing. So I trained as a podiatrist, a foot specialist. No foot fetish jokes from me, please. I've had enough of those in my lifetime. But this is what I trained in. And as I was training, a lot of your client groups, the people that have problems with their feet, are old people. So they sit in your chair and you're sorting out their corns and colors and all that. And they tell you their life stories. And this is in Edinburgh. And I met a lot of people that would tell you, I went off to work at the age of 14. They were helping support the family. They were working in factories. They were doing jobs. And this is kind of in living memory. But if we think about the way the world is set up now, the clothes that you are wearing might have been made by some kid working in a sweatshop. This whole idea that kids don't work is, I mean, if your society can support that, it's cool. But in other parts of the world, families rely on people that would consider to be kids to work, whereas elsewhere you might get away with being a teenager until you're in your mid-30s. That's kind of the way it is. So what I did with the character of Ropa, the reason I give a lot of these responsibilities, I mean, part of it is just that thing that you do with young characters, right? You need your young character to go off on adventures. Therefore, they become an orphan. You kill off the parents. And you see that replicated so many times in literature. And now they're free because there's things Ropa does that if her parents were there, they'll just tell her, go to bed. You know, these fantasies of talking to ghosts and solving their problems. You're not getting out of the house, young lady. So she's free to do this stuff and move about the city. But I was also thinking about the Edinburgh that I built is, some people have called it dystopian, but all I did was kind of blend Edinburgh in with elements of its own history. So by doing that, I can now have kids like Ropa working and stuff and taking on responsibilities that we wouldn't, ideally, if you can afford it, give to a kid of her age if she was your own child.
That's great. So Sue, on your characters, aside the Maestro, Magistrate and The Mathematician, you have strong female lead characters in the Hairdresser of Harare and the Edinburgh Nights Series. Did you find it very difficult, seeing that as you're a man? Did you find it very difficult writing characters of the opposite sex? And why did you choose these women to be your protagonists?
Well, here we go. I should start off by saying my mother was a woman. So, so I've encountered this rare species before. and if the statisticians are correct, then they make up more than half the population anyway. But so with some of these things, after you write stuff, you can rationalize it and say, I did it because of A, B, C. But part of it, when you get a character like Ropa, she was zingy. It actually started as a short story that I did in 2015 for an e-zine called Electric Spec. And I had this interesting character with a zingy voice that I thought I would want to work with again because they were so compelling for me. But when it comes to writing female characters, the problem that I always get is, you know, if you interact with women, you know they're all so radically different. It's the same with men. So you can't have this archetype of this is woman. And when you do it, right, if I started thinking woman, I would default to my stereotypes, of which I have a lot. You know, this is stuff you grow up and you absorb some of these ideas. I did the same thing with Priya, who's a character in a wheelchair. If I thought disabled, and I would just put in my stereotypes of what I think a disabled person is. So the way I do it, and I know certain writers like to research a lot and say, I've done research and this, but my starting point is character. So who is this person in front of me? Well, Ropa is highly intelligent. She's a problem solver, and she enjoys getting into problems and solving them. She's a leader. She's also fairly cautious because of sort of like her own family background and history. So I've got these personality traits with which I can work now. Now, if she kind of had the powers of Wonder Woman, she would solve problems differently. But in the book that I wrote, she's almost always the underdog. She comes up against magicians that are classically trained that know magic much better than she does. So she has to have these creative solutions to these problems. And one of the things that she does is, in each book, she's always reading a work by a strategist. So in the first book, she was always referencing The Art of War. In the second book, it's the Book of Five Swords by Miyamoto. I hope I got that right. It would be very embarrassing if I didn't. In the third book that I'm working on now, she's using these ideas from Machiavelli. So it's her character that matters to me more than anything else. And then I try to think, from what I know about her, how would she handle this particular problem? I did the same thing with Priya. So in the first scene that I wrote Priya, she was in a wheelchair upside down in the library reading. And then I had to figure out, okay, what's her personality? So she's an adrenaline junkie, she's a thrill seeker, whereas Ropa might be a little bit more cautious. The two work together often. She is much more capable because she's studied magic. Therefore, she's more willing to get herself into situations that Ropa would kind of think, hang on, this might be a little bit too much for me. And that's kind of how I try to work it, because the other thing of saying I'm writing a woman, for me, it doesn't quite work, because you're then going to default to that stupid thing where you're like, she looked in the mirror and said, am I beautiful or not? Which male authors do.
Okay, so this is like my second to the last question, because I can see our time is going. So I want to talk about your style. There's something I always hear, find your style and stick with it. But in every book you've published, your style has always been different, your style of writing. So in The Hairdresser of Harare, you're right, it's more simple and like fast-paced, easy. Then we have the Maestro, the Magistrate and The Mathematician. This MMM, we have MMM, which is more like structurally complex. And then you give us the Edinburgh Nights Series where you write more wit and sarcasm. So do you think that writers should have a particular style they identify with? And do you intentionally change your style when you write a new book?
I always hesitate to prescribe anything to writers, because one of the things you quickly realize at some point, if you've been doing this long enough, is what works for someone else might not necessarily work for you. As a young male writer, I went through a slight kind of Tarantino phase, where I wanted to do stories with a high body count and snappy dialogue and stuff. I can't pull that stuff off even if I tried. It just doesn't work for me, but for someone else, it will work. So these changes or these discrepancies that you've noted between the different texts is me trying to find a solution to a particular problem. So you've got Wimbai, who's a young hairdresser who flunked out her O-levels, GCSEs, and went into the world of work. She's not a reader, she's not interested in that. She comes from a certain kind of community, so I have to at least try to style her in a certain way. With Ropa, who's an autodidact, who's also maybe a second or third generation migrant, or child of migrants, she uses language in a different way from how I would use it. So Ropa's language has a lot of slang, a bit of Scots. She uses scientific terminology that I wouldn't use in ordinary dialogue and stuff like that. So part of the joy of, and doing this thing that we do, I have to say it's a lot of fun. I enjoy what I do, and I find it, and one of the best bits of working with Ropa was trying to figure out how this voice is going to work. So when you're in it and you're in that pocket and you're doing that work, you find something strange happens. Like if I go back to the emails that I was sending people during that period I was writing it, even my own style had changed because I was really in this voice and this thing that I was doing. And perhaps a few of my colleagues who I emailed would have said, this guy just sounds bizarre at the moment. Step forward to book 3, which I'm going into the edits for at the beginning of next month. One of the most difficult things for me, having done the first 2 books and taken a bit of a break, was getting back into that voice again, because I've got my own style and way of speaking, which is very different from this character. And until I managed to get myself back into that mode, it simply didn't work. I'm also working on this other project that I told you I might have to go back and revisit. And also one of the problems that I'm having with it is the tone of it and the sound of it. So with this, it's not me trying to flex and say, oh, I can do this or that, but it's really me trying to solve certain problems of how best can I convey this particular story.
So you mentioned you're bringing out your next book. It's in the editing phase. That's the 3rd book in the Edinburgh Nights Series, The Mystery at Dunvegan Castle. Okay, so what exactly should we expect from it? What are you giving to us? What's different?
So in the first 2 books, Ropa zooms all across Edinburgh, and she's got this huge canvas to work with. I wanted to do something different from the 3rd. The Mystery at Dunvegan Castle, there's a conference or an academic thing that the magicians are doing, and they hold it once every 2 years at this particular venue. So I wanted to write a country house mystery in which Ropa now doesn't have that bag of tricks that she has of, you know, when you run out of ideas, you're like, let's shift this to this other part of town. You've only got the castle and its grounds to work with. And Ropa also has this near encyclopedic knowledge of Edinburgh's history and that kind of thing. But I was moving her off to a setting and a location that she had never been to before. It was a way of trying to reconfigure the character, and that might also speak to why writing it was a little bit trickier than doing the first 2, because I then had to find ways of conveying information about this place that the character might not know about, and to find solutions to those problems. But book 3 for me also acts as kind of like a pause between the final 2 installments when they come. It's kind of a way of ratcheting up the stakes. So you're gonna have more villainous villains, ghost, librarian gets murdered, there's Ethiopian magicians in attendance.
Stop giving us spoilers.
It's not a spoiler, I assure you. And a scroll gets stolen, and Ropa has to find out who done it under very difficult circumstances, because she doesn't know who to trust in that situation.
One of the things I really like about the books is the fact that you bring in this whodunit kind of idea into it. So it's kind of like reading crime in like a fantasy setting, which I obviously really love. I'm very excited for the 3rd book, and I really hope that when you guys actually read it, you love Ropa as much as I do, and probably you dye your hair green as well, and wear boots, and start wearing black. Okay, so we're going to move into Q&A from the audience. So does anybody have a question? Just one question? Just one question. Does anybody have a question?
I think we've safely put them to sleep.
Does anybody have a question? Okay, if nobody has, what? Oh, somebody has a question. He's over there.
Hi. Wow, this is loud. Okay. Hi, my name is Edwin.
Can't hear you.
Hi, my name is Edwin. I wanted to ask about supernatural occurrences and what Tendai believes about them. Does he believe they actually happen? Does he believe it's just science or EMP? Oh,
About, so.
okay, sorry. Yeah, so supernatural occurrences, what do you believe about them? Do you think they're real? Do you think they are, fiction, science? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm naturally a skeptic. I mean, our mind has this ability to create scenarios and things that we believe. I mean, if you think about it, we're all in this room, but we're probably having 30, 40, 50 different experiences because of this gray meat inside of our heads. We're not experiencing this thing in a universal way. And so when I think about supernatural occurrences, I did an event at a school in Preston Pans just last week. And I asked these kids whether they believe in ghosts, and they were telling me fantastical stories. Like one was like, yeah, my granddad died, and in our house, his cane is always moving locations, and they kind of live with it. They're like, oh yeah, it's granddad has moved his cane again, that kind of thing. So, yeah, what do you do with that when a kid is telling you that and they genuinely believe that there's this phenomena that's going on? But what I always find out about these things is whenever you try to test them and say, if you put a camera there, you'll never see that cane move. So if you have something and we can explain it, then I'll believe it. But for now, I choose to be skeptical because I hear all sorts of, I mean, you want to be a member of my family, man. The amount of crazy stuff that comes out is phenomenal. And if I believed all of it, yeah, I would be nuts as well.
Thank you very much, Tendai. I think we're actually, I want to get your hand, basically. Oh, there's another question. Okay, someone else. Oh, just one. Okay, so we're done. Okay, I'm so sorry. You can see Tendai after the class.